It's D-Day for the Liberals as the party is set to decide the fate of net zero at a special meeting. It's happening in about 20 minutes here in Canberra. Joining me live as we count down to the start of that gathering, Andrew Clennell and Trudy McIntosh. Andrew, what's going to happen?
Well, I've been predicting they're going to dump net zero in any form, and I'll get to that in a minute. But what I can reveal now is that there are two options that will be presented by Dan Tehan and basically sanctioned by Sussan Ley to this Liberal Party room meeting. And those options are one with net zero and one without net zero. So there you have it, Kieran. Basically, it's still on the table, the prospect of keeping net zero, even though the numbers seem to be very much against it. Two options Dan Tehan, the Shadow Energy Minister, is going to present. But my understanding is, and I think you can just tell it from the television interviews, frankly, they're going to dump any sort of mention of net zero in their policy, but they're going to say we're about emissions reduction, and they're going to say we're still part of the Paris Agreement because the Paris Agreement is about global net zero by 2100. They're going to say Australia can have another target. They're going to say power prices are the main issue that we should be addressing. So there'll be a lot of moderate MPs who helped Sussan Ley in the job who won't be happy with this. But the biggest sign to me is Alex Hawke on air this morning, basically Sussan Ley's right-hand man saying we should dump net zero. I mean, that tells you everything, doesn't it? Especially because it was the moderates and the centre-right who backed Sussan Ley into the job. Alex Hawke is in the centre-right. He's now moving with the right, and that's a majority of the party room. And I also think an integral element to this story, which I broke last Monday, was the Liberal leadership phone hookup that occurred after the Nationals made their decision on this. And as I reported at the time, there was only one voice on that Liberal leadership call that talked about retaining net zero and said we'd be crazy to dump it and that the Nationals have a gun to our head, and that was Ann Ruston, the Deputy Senate Leader. Everyone else, whether it was James McGrath or Angus Taylor or Micaiah Cash or James Patterson or Alex Hawke, were for dumping net zero on that call. So we'll see research from the Menzies Research Centre, I've been told, presented by Dan Tehan. Interested to see what that says. Trudy's also been reporting Andrew Hurst, the Federal Liberal Director, will give a briefing. Now, Kieran, every one of the briefings that Andrew Hurst has given that I'm aware of to the Coalition has always told them that climate change is an issue with voters. So if there's any spoke in the wheel to the hopes of Sussan Ley to keep the Coalition together, or indeed the right and the centre-right to dump the net zero tag, it could be that briefing from Andrew Hurst, I reckon. There is one small other thing in the mix of that, though, and Scott Morrison, when he pulled on the net zero decision, actually took this to Cabinet. The polling generally shows people are in favour of a net zero target up to a point, up until you tell them the cost. Once you tell them any sort of cost associated with it, as the cost gets greater, the support gets lower.
Trudy, this issue has been such a vexed one for the Liberals for so long. And whenever you get the whole party in one room and over an issue as contentious as this, there's always the risk of an unknown move, an unknown play, an unpredictable outcome. I remember when Andrew Robb pulled the card on Malcolm Turnbull back in the day, basically pulled the rug from under Turnbull, and it happened in the privacy of the room. He did that, and that was basically the end of the CPRS support for at the time under the Rudd government. That was not predicted. I'm just always a little bit cautious when the whole party room goes in. Leadership questions obviously continue. Sussan Ley, she's trying to hold on, but I just think there's an unpredictability around this when it comes to her own leadership to be certain of anything in terms of Sussan Ley's hold on the job.
Well, certainly, Kieran, no one is privately backgrounding journalists at the moment to say that there's this imminent push to oust Sussan Ley as leader. The view within the camp that would be most likely to eventually do that, Angus Taylor's camp, is that this can't happen before Christmas. She needs to be given time over summer. That ultimately, if there is a resolution on net zero today, that quote buys her time. The question is how much time. To go back to what Andrew was saying, though, that a presentation that will come from Andrew Hurst, the Federal Party Director, one moderate put it to me yesterday that they were hoping that that contribution from Andrew Hurst might actually break through to some of the more hardened positions on the right, that they might reflect on the political reality. To me, that seems like that's not going to be what suddenly changes anyone's mind as hearing some research from the party director. There are such hardened positions in this party room at the moment. It seems like moderates, that they're saying privately that they don't want to walk away from this meeting with nothing to do with net zero included. It has boiled down to this debate, hasn't it, about 2 words. That's literally where this is. People have told me there is a lot of agreement. We need to get power prices down. We can agree that we can reduce emissions. That can be the focus, but we just can't stick with these 2 words. So how do they emerge on the other side of this united? I think Conservatives think, Kieran, that ultimately in the end the moderates will just fall in line here, that there are much fewer of them in terms of the raw numbers, and that therefore they will fall in line. Although one said to me, given the public statements, particularly from Andrew Bragg, about that threat to quit if they don't have any, commitment to the Paris Agreement, he probably will have to follow through on that commitment to leave the shadow cabinet.
It sounds like, Andrew, from what you rightly point out, that comment from Hawke today, Alex Hawke, the other comments from Angus Taylor, Dan Tehan even, they've repeatedly said over the last couple of weeks since the Nats announced their policy, look, the Nats are saying they want to commit and remain within the international Paris framework. So they seem to be pointing to that whenever asked, would you consider leaving that framework? So to me, there does seem a fig leaf of credibility for the likes of Bragg to remain.
Exactly. And I think this has been a red herring all week, Kieran, as I keep saying. Bragg said, if we dump the Paris Agreement, I'll quit the front bench. But he also says, I can't see us dumping the Paris Agreement. And that's because he would already know that even the right is not asking to leave the Paris Agreement. So, I just don't see him quitting. But incidentally, if Andrew Bragg quit the front bench, so what? No one's heard of Andrew Bragg. He's not like Jacinta Price or Andrew Hastie. So, look, I think, that would be pretty silly of Andrew Bragg, frankly. It's a bit like Julie and Lisa quitting over The Voice. No one cared about that. They care in the, halls of that building, Parliament House, but out there in the open, it's basically a meaningless gesture. But, he will fight in that room for a net zero to remain. So will Jane Hume. So, so would Anne Ruston in the Shadow Ministry, presumably. But politics is about numbers, as Trudy pointed out. They don't have the numbers. So it's going to be, from my point of view, a bit of a faux fight. They'll have the fight. This will take forever. It could take more than 3 hours, I've been told. And then we'll come up with I suspect, the conclusion that I've reported for days now, which is net zero gone, still in the Paris Agreement. We're about emissions reduction. But mostly we're about low power prices. That's our priority. The only question for me is, how are they going to differentiate their position from the Nationals? Because it's going to be a bit embarrassing if they just have the Nationals policy whole as bolus. So there's got to be something there for that working group they're talking about after Shadow Ministry between the Libs and Nats to work on. So I wonder if it's a more ambitious midterm emissions target or something of that nature. I wonder what it is. There's got to be something in there that the Liberal Party's done. They're not just adopting a National Party policy, because that would be pretty embarrassing.
The issue here as well, Trudy, is that there is a vulnerability for the government. You look at the ongoing power price rebates, the industrial subsidies paid to Tomago and other suppliers of energy and refiners in manufacturing. This is still a really difficult policy conundrum for the federal government. So this is the irony of this, if they can get their act together finally, they can make political ground, and surely within the government's ranks, they are pulling every lever possible to get more gas into the system, because that's what's going to provide the stability and get prices down throughout this transition.
And because we saw the extension of those energy bill rebates before the last election, there was a bit of, papering over that real increase that we've seen in electricity prices. The government is contemplating whether it does another extension of the energy rebates. But as the Prime Minister and Treasurer have both said, they can't go on forever. At some point, you have to withdraw those subsidies. We saw that with some of the state subsidies. But look what that did to the inflation read, essentially scaring the Reserve Bank. Look, I think when it comes to this competitive tension, though, within the coalition, just back to what Andrew was saying there, that we've seen it play out this morning between Tim Wilson, he considers himself a modern Liberal, and National Senator Matt Canavan, who's the fiercest of opponents of net zero. Have a look at this. We can just show you this quickly. They're fighting it out on Twitter over whether to dump net zero. Tim Wilson saying that the party can't be Nationals light. Matt Canavan returning serve saying here that I don't care how you rationalise it, Tim, just dump net zero and take up the fight for a change. So this is an interesting dynamic internally because there will be people in that Liberal Party room who don't want to once again be dictated to by the junior coalition partner, but they just are emboldened, aren't they, Kieran, in terms of the electoral victories they had last time around. Nationals will tell you we didn't lose seats last time around. We nearly gained them under David Littleproud. That wasn't the same for the Liberal Party. Yeah,
there was a bit of drama for some of the Liberals making their way to Canberra this morning. 3 of them on board a Qantas flight from Adelaide when their cabin filled with smoke. The plane had to make an emergency landing. Our political correspondent Cameron Redden is with us. Cam, as if today wasn't eventful enough, have they all made it to Canberra in time? Actually, Cam, we've got a bit of an issue with Cam, a technical problem with his link. Trudy, you talk us through it. What happened?
Well, they took off, and about 10 minutes into the takeoff, this Qantas-linked plane was forced to make an emergency landing back in Adelaide. There were 3 Liberals on board that flight, including Leah Bly, the Senator, and MP Tony Passon. There was smoke filling the cabin at one point. They managed to make a safe landing. They've got on other flights now and have made their way back as we see Angie Bell, the Shadow Environment Minister, make her way into the room. So just some drama, I suppose, ahead of this meeting starting. There had been some disquiet, hadn't there, about the timing of this meeting. Phil Thompson on your show yesterday, Kieran, I think the most publicly strident about the timing of this. He wasn't happy that this was put on the Wednesday after Remembrance Day, meaning MPs coming from the farthest parts of our country had to make their way here yesterday.
Let's bring in Andrew Clennell's with us as well. This is rolling coverage of this drama within the Liberals. Andrew, I've got to say, there's a bit of deja vu all over again. Pardon the language, but I tell you what, I've seen the Liberals have this fight so many times and still they are having it once again. It's 2025. I'm not saying it's, this is not the only party that's had its issues. As Joel Fitzgibbon rightly pointed out, Labor's had so much drama itself over this. Rudd lost his prime ministership, arguably, over this when he, in the wake of the Copenhagen summit. It's been such a diabolical policy issue for both sides of politics for decades, Andrew.
Yeah, but 16 years now for the coalition and particularly the Liberal Party, isn't it? I guess you're referring, first of all, to 2009. That's what got Tony Abbott in the job in the first place. So that's an extraordinary period of time for one issue to have a part in leadership change. And I think that's one of the motivations for the debate that's going on today. It's kind of becomes, there's Dan Tehan, the Shadow Energy Minister. He looks happy, doesn't he? No doubt he's got the 2 documents in his hand that I've spoken about, Kieran. Look, I just want to see that Tim Wilson tweet again because, I know Trudy's been reporting on it this morning, but we better see who's here first. But I just find that extraordinary. Talk about poking the Nationals in the eye. And Jane Hume's been doing a bit of this too. We can be Nationals light? Really?
Yeah.
I'm glad he kept it for the party room.
Look at this big delegation, Andrew, coming down.
There's the
all
right.
Conservatives by the look of it.
There's the right. There you go. Jacinta Price, Angus Taylor,
wow.
Andrew Hastie. Angus Taylor and Andrew Hastie together, the unity ticket. The 2 blokes who want to be leader.
Sarah Henderson up front, isn't it?
Sarah Henderson up front.
On the left.
The dumped front bencher. Garth Hamilton is supposed to be Hastie's numbers man. There's Marie Kovacic, just a moderate getting in the way.
What about that?
I think that's real imagery and very planned that these guys, both of whom are competitors for the leadership, have decided to walk up together with Jacinta, who of course was Angus's deputy candidate, And that is a show of strength from the right faction of the Liberal Party. That is a show of strength. And typical
And the
moderates,
Henderson reference there is important, Andrew, given that she was the one who said in the last week that she couldn't back the leader. She wasn't explicit. So I know she's a dumped front bencher, but her language of the last week has been extraordinary, really, for a Lib to say essentially she doesn't support the leader, and behind her, the two would-be leaders in Taylor and Hastie. Extraordinary images.
And just a quick count as I saw them walk down, that was 16 at least members of the right side of the party as we see Jane Hume make her way in. She wants to see net zero retained. Look, that is incredible symbolism. Tell me, how is this a united party? We're coordinating. It's not a leadership spill. That's what we're told.
Well,
yeah,
They're
we've
not
seen
allegedly
that.
not going to spill
Well,
today.
we've seen
and it's
that.
the imagery you see when you walk into a spill meeting, isn't it?
That's right. We've seen that in leadership spills, haven't we? We've seen the group following Abbott, whether it was Matthias Cormann and co, or the group following Turnbull, whether it was Arthur Sinodinos and co. And that brought up memories of that. Whereas the mods, well, they're just coming in dribs and drabs, typical moderates. I mean, I was thinking the other day, Kieran, basically, if you want to fight with a faction, you take on the Liberal moderates. They fold every time. If you take on the Labor right, the Labor left, or the Liberal right, they're all animals. So they'll stick it to you. But the moderates, and that's a bit of a test for the moderates too. So I mean, what I'm predicting is a leader who got 29 votes, 20 of whom were from the moderates, abandoning the moderates with this policy. And when you think about that, you can see what difficulty Sussan Ley has out of this. It's just a matter of time. Mel McIntosh, there you go. So you add that 16 on the right, plus others, as a leader. Looks happy.
There you go.
Is that a forced smile?
One member beside her, Andrew.
Yeah.
Not even the deputy.
Taylor and Hastie on one side. Richard Colbeck, was it? With the leader.
Yeah, Richard Colbeck. I just think they hadn't coordinated this, had they? They had not expected, I don't think, that they were going to come the right in a coordinated approach for the TV cameras. This is a politically staged, politically charged corridor, isn't it, in Australia?
Sure it is. Except that image is extraordinary.
It is, but you know what? I mean, they can put their hand up in this meeting and they're not going to. So, they're just flirting with it at the moment, which I don't have a great deal of respect for, to be honest. I mean, but, seize the day. If you're saying we're challengers, seize the day. Don't just have this show of strength and hang around on when it suits me, I'll run for leader. And their view is, if they take Sussan Ley down too quickly, it'll be a terrible look taking a woman down after 6 months. But then why put on a parade like that,
Well, and the funny thing to me, Andrew, is they were backgrounding against Sussan Ley from day one. As soon as she lost by only 4 votes, what you were being told privately from within that camp is it's just a matter of time. What does that say about how there was ever going to be stability in the Liberal Party ranks?
I think
the view in the moderates is she wasn't really given a chance.
I think, but when you only win by 3 votes, you've always got that problem. I mean, memorably, John Gorton and Billy McMahon tied 33-all in a leadership vote, and Gorton said, well, I've got to go as PM because I haven't got enough of a margin.
Yeah.
And that's always been the difficulty for Sussan Ley too. She needed a more emphatic victory. It was a bit like when Dutton got close to Turnbull or when the empty chair got close to Abbott. That's the problem with calling on a spill, of course. And so she's always had a problem from that day on, and her performance hasn't assisted, it's got to be said. I know she's been white-handed, but her performance hasn't been strong. And that's where the press conference, which she'll hold tomorrow, that's my expectation, Kieran. Shadow Energy Minister Dan Tehan, we'll hear from him this afternoon whenever this meeting ends. And then tomorrow after Shadow Cabinet, we'll hear from Sussan Ley. And her performance at that press conference will be a very big test indeed, how she's able to sell this policy under what's likely to be some pretty hard questioning.
Indeed, and Dan Tehan, he'll be at that news conference with her and will join me on Newsday after they hold that news conference. So Dan Tehan... the meeting starts at 9, I'm told, tomorrow, that Shadow Ministry, and then Tehan Ley hold a news conference, and then Dan Tehan will come on the program to talk about the policy. But this is it is fascinating to watch. When you look at the group again, if we put up, let's find those images of the 16 plus Conservatives. Just looking at each of those in that group, Jacinta Nampijinpa Price has stood down from the front bench. Hastie has stood down from the front bench. Sarah Henderson blowing up that she's not on the front bench and refusing to back Sussan Ley's leadership. It is really the image says it all. But then, as you say, the two leadership aspirants there side by side, and they're not willing to put their hat in the ring just yet. But it seems, Trudy, it does seem inevitable that at some point she might get through this issue, but I think it would be a miracle, long odds, that she gets to the next election. I think as long as I haven't missed him, I don't think you see James Patterson in that grouping. No. He was a supporter of Taylor in the leadership ballot. He's, he's locked in at the moment behind Sussan Ley. To me, that's the pivotal switch. If James Patterson decides that he doesn't have confidence in Sussan Ley anymore, that could be a precipitation of things to come. I was curious of your view, Andrew, of what's Sussan Ley not giving a view internally on the position of net zero. I've heard people argue both ways on this, that, under Peter Dutton, he would have given a view. You wouldn't have been in any doubt as to where he stood. Others say, well, that's part of the benefit of this process. That clearly didn't work under Dutton, command and control, and that it's a better process for her to actually listen to the views of the room. Yeah, I mean, she's not firm enough in her views in Shadow Cabinet, I'm told too. But I'll tell you what, she has given a view internally. And that view was what I reported last Monday, Trudy, at the Liberal leadership phone hookup, when she said, so it's not an explicit view about net zero, but what she said is, my main job is to keep the Liberal Party together and the coalition together. That means dumping net zero. Right when I reported that, I went, net zero's gone. That's what it means. And an interesting point there Kieran makes about James Patterson. 16 we have there, right? I'll tell you who's not there, because she's been incapacitated by an accident, a bike accident. Mackay Cash. And who else isn't there who'd be on the view of dumping net zero? James Patterson. All right, keep adding the numbers. Alex Hawke went on air, said I'm against net zero. Melissa McIntosh. All right, that's 22, right? You got a party room of about, I don't know, what is it, about 50, in the early 50s or late 40s? You've nearly got half there, right there. You can see it. Yeah. And you can see why net zero can't survive this discussion. They haven't got the numbers, the moderates. Simple as that. Once the centre-right moved, that's it. Yeah, the right's already there. And remember that she was propped up as well, Andrew, by the fact that Giselle Kaptarian was allowed into that initial party room meeting in the thought that she might win that seat at Bradfield. That was not to be. Some of the outgoing senators that were there, including Linda Reynolds, supported Sussan Ley as well. So there has been some change because of just the nature of the internals of the Liberal Party room. I just want to remind our viewers how entrenched these differences are. Have a look at how the Conservatives have been arguing against net zero publicly. There's included some free swipes at the moderates as well. As a very, very, very low bar and low hanging fruit, we should be simply walking away from the concept of net zero.
Tom, I think there's overwhelming support for us to dump net zero.
And so my colleagues who argue that we've got to look after the cities and keep net zero, it does not stack up. And to, those people who want to threaten to quit, then quit. You're not that important anyway. Moderates, though, believe that in order to survive as a political movement, to win back those seats that they have been losing at the last two elections, they must retain the words net zero. That, for better or for worse, has become a proxy for a belief in climate action. This is how some of the moderates have been making the case. They are telling me that they want to see credible action on climate. Would you quit your post if net zero aspiration wasn't there? I genuinely won't speculate on it. We have to be in Paris. We can't be a prior state. But has to be towards an intent of decarbonisation. Australians are expecting their alternative government to be a government that is actually is taking seriously the reduction of emissions.